Network. Thank you all for the time this afternoon. Just as I was about to say, just so everybody knows that the meeting is going to be recorded today and will be shared afterwards. But when we go into breakout rooms at towards the end of the sessions, they won't be being recorded, so feel free to share. It's also worth mentioning as well that the names of locations of hotels are restricted, so can't be talked about, and so just be mindful of that when having discussions about hotels in your area as well. So as I said, I'm Rosie Tapsfield, Chair of the City of Sanctuary Local Authority Network, and I'm an officer in Newcastle City Council coordinating the City of Sanctuary. I'd also like to introduce Bashir Fatahi, who is new and is going to be co-chairing the Local Authority Network alongside myself. He has come originally from Afghanistan and is now based in London, and brings lived experience to the steering group. So it's brilliant to have him on board, and I'm sure you'll hear more from him in time as well. Yeah, so just to start things off, a couple of kind of housekeeping and welcoming things from me. Just a reminder about the Local Authorities Network, and just to say that there's lots of support and kind of different things on offer through the City of Sanctuary Local Authority Network. I'm sure there'll be links and things put in the chat as we go, but if anyone would like more information about this, if it's your first time attending the meeting and you would like to find out some more, please do contact Maggie, and she can tell you a little bit more about it. Before we get started, kind of getting into the agenda today and looking at hotels, I just wanted to say congratulations to Salford, who've had a really busy few weeks, and have become the most recently awarded Local Authority of Sanctuary, which is fantastic news and great to have them on board. And Maggie, I don't know if you just want to spend a couple of minutes talking a little bit about their application and some of the highlights from that.
Yes, thank you so much, Rosie. Yes, indeed, they have been through quite a rigorous process, and it was really, really encouraging to see how they have embedded this kind of inclusion and welcome across various services. They started off with schools of sanctuary, but then thought, oh, it would be really great if our whole institution became recognized as a council of sanctuary. So they have embedded welcome and inclusion across schools, adult education, public health, their work with separated children, community safety, arts and culture, housing, and leisure and libraries as well, and also the youth service, which I thought was really, really great to see. They are very lucky insofar as they have 4 leaders, 4 elected members with lived experience of speaking sanctuary, who have been really instrumental in chairing some of their multi-agency meetings and ensuring that lived experience voice is the golden thread that works through all of the kind of strategies and policy and practice in Salford. So it's the first in the Greater Manchester region. So we are really hopeful that that will set off a trend in that region. Thank you.
Great news. Okay, we've got a packed agenda as always and lots to get through, and we have factored in some time at the end, as I say, to go into breakout rooms to get into some discussion with colleagues as well. So before we go over to our first speaker, I just really wanted to quickly kind of give a little bit of an update and some information about Newcastle's experience of hotels. So in Newcastle, we have currently have 5 hotel sites. We have over 600 people in the city living within hotels, including 1 family hotel. And our experience over the last couple of years has, I think, like most of you on the call, incredibly challenging, you know, really working at pace to kind of try and respond to some of the challenges. We've worked really, really closely with partners, anything from initial donations as people are first arriving of warm clothes and shoes, to kind of longer term programs of support that we've managed to put in place. So for example, the Newcastle United Foundation has managed to put some football in place for one of the hotel sites that we have, which is quite far out of the city centre and away from a lot of support services, as well as some of the kind of health support and education support that has been put in place to coordinate the support going into the family hotel. As I mentioned, super challenging for local authorities. And I think it's also just worth saying that, of course, this is incredibly challenging for the people living within hotels. I'm really struck every time I speak to anyone who's residing with me in one of the hotels or go into the hotels myself, just how challenging that is for the people who are residing there and how difficult that is, and what a challenging time. So with that in mind, I'm going to hand over to Vicky Ledwidge from Migration Yorkshire, who's going to give us a little bit of a regional perspective about approaches to supporting people seeking sanctuary who are within hotel accommodation. So thanks, Vicky.
Thanks, Rosie. Before I get going, I just want to grab a couple of seconds to share a different resource with you. So Migration Yorkshire fulfil the Strategic Migration Partnership for Yorkshire and Humber, amongst other things. We do generate a lot of resources, and our latest one, I'm just going to put a link in the chat. We've compiled a bit of a horizon scanning document for the year, which we thought might be quite useful to colleagues on this call, because it's riddled with national issues as well. So I just wanted to take 2 seconds to share that with you. Have a look, and if there's anything that we can help you with, then don't hesitate to get in touch. But I'm going to talk to you about contingency sites. I've got a couple of slides to share, but before I do, just to give you a little bit of context, our first contingency site opened in September 2019, and we have had them ever since. We have a significant number in our region, but as Rosie said at the beginning, the names, the locations, the data behind it is restricted by the Home Office, so I can't share too much detail about that. We have, over the course of the last couple of years, developed quite a good process of standing up and managing the hotels along with MEAs. So I'm just going to talk that through with you very quickly now, and I've banked in a little bit of time for some questions at the end. So let me just share my screen. If somebody could tell me that you could see this, that would be great.
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Please note our lovely shiny new branding. We're very excited about it. So, so I will share these slides with Rosie as well, so she'll be able to pass them on to the rest of you. So that's just a tiny little bit about us. We support organisations and people to achieve the most positive outcomes for everybody in Yorkshire and Humber. And I think particularly when we're talking about contingency sites, it's a very, very difficult situation for everybody involved. I think, you know, the volume of work that has fallen to me as well is quite significant. So we see our role very much in the heart of everything that's going on to help all of our partners to do the best that they can by the individuals and the families that are in our contingency sites. We also use the term contingency rather than hotels, because we've got a number of former student accommodation science centres that have been used. So we prefer the overarching term of contingency. Right, so this is how things work in Yorkshire and Humber. I'm not saying for a moment this is best practice, but it's probably useful to talk it through with you. So initially, as soon as site is suggested, Anne Smith will email the Chief Exec of the local authority and the Head of Migration Yorkshire to notify that a site has been identified. That information then immediately is passed to the migration lead at the local authority. Now, either that goes via the Chief Exec or it comes via us, but whichever route, as soon as the email lands in my inbox, I put it in front of the migration lead. Our role then is to arrange a stand-up call to discuss that site with a number of key partners, but we have an understanding that the meeting is scheduled to the availability of the local authority migration lead only, and the other key players will either move conflicting appointments or they'll delegate somebody to come to the meeting. I think in the world that we're working in at the moment, when everybody's at pace, finding a suitable time for all key players could take weeks. So there's just this an official understanding that the availability is on the migration lead rather than the cohort. The location, the LA migration lead is then has the responsibility of nominating contacts from health, police, fire and the voluntary sector to come along to these meetings. Now, what I will say is we pretty much know who those people are already, because the vast majority of our local authority areas already have contingency sites or have had stand-up calls for potential contingency sites in the past. So we've already got our invitation list really for every local authority, but we do just confirm who those key contacts are. And then of course the Home Office are invited, along with MEAs, who are our accommodation provider. For MEAs, we invite Ray Blundell, who is one of the directors, the head of safeguarding, the partnership manager for that sub-region, and the regional manager as well. So there are 4 people from MEAs who are invited. They then also sometimes bring in other colleagues, but we do try to have a breadth of colleagues from MEAs in the call to answer the questions that our other contacts might have. Our role then within the framework of these meetings is to chair them and to act as secretariat. So we have an amazing support officer, a guy called Ben Ford, who will take quite in-depth notes and also manages an action log, which we review every meeting until the site is open. We host and chair these meetings every week until a site is either stood down or it's opened. And as soon as it is stood up, we then pass the baton on to MEAs. They have then responsibility for ongoing meetings. They will schedule weekly calls for either 6 or 8 weeks, and then move to monthly calls after that. These are operational meetings rather than strategic, so it's more about sort of day-to-day living in the hotel and the provision that's needed. What we're also considering at the moment for some of our local authorities who've got more than one site is that if the sites are relatively established and they've been running for some time, we actually almost have a place-based approach. So for Bradford, for example, we now have one monthly call where all of the sites are discussed rather than an individual meeting for every site. Running alongside this, we've also got quite a robust health process for standing up health. So there's a hyperlink there through to the Yorkshire and Humber Public Health Network, which has the flowchart on that. So that's a piece of work that we did with me as the Home Office, the North East Migration Partnership, and OHID to establish how health is stood up for contingency sites, because obviously they've got a very different process with commissioning and training and all kinds of things embedded into it. So do have a look at that. And I'm sure Kathy Railton at OHID would be happy to talk to you if you wanted any more details on that. So that's kind of how we do things until a site is stood up. We've got a standard agenda for all of the meetings as well, which again helps with everybody's very familiar in our region now about how we work around contingency sites. So this standard agenda just flows really naturally, actually. So the Home Office, they will always give some kind of national or regional context at the beginning of the meeting. MEAs then provide an operational update for the sites that we're discussing. If the site is yet to open at the beginning, they'll talk through all the practicalities. That they provide a slide pack for contacts, which talks about, how to raise safeguarding issues, what's happening around laundry, what the meal provision is. So they'll talk through that in some detail. And they'll also give input into any work that's going on with the voluntary sector or with other frontline organisations to supplement sort of life on the contingency site. Local authority then will respond to MEAs and the Home Office and also add in any updates, issues and concerns from their perspective. And it's at this stage as well, if we're talking about a family site, the education colleagues will respond and children's services will also respond. We then go to health, police, fire, voluntary sector, and it just flows quite nicely. The action plan, as I mentioned, is reviewed within all of these meetings as well. So it is quite a simple but effective way of chairing. Ongoing communications happen as well. I just wanted to touch on this because I'm not sure that every area has this, but MEAs are very good actually at providing information. So once the site is opened, they compile a weekly hotel summary, so which then gets sent to the migration lead every Monday. That's a retrospective view of what's happened on site the previous week. So it will talk about the numbers of people coming and going, the main languages, whether there's been any safeguarding issues, what the meal plan is for the site, what in-reach activity has been provided by other frontline organisations, and also what's planned for the forthcoming week, which is quite helpful. It gives a little bit of a snapshot as to what's going on. We also have an arrangement with MEAs whereby they share any relevant information and data that's needed with health colleagues and education colleagues. I think education, particularly if it's a family site, the names, dates of birth, nationalities of children are shared as they arrive on site to facilitate school admission, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit later. And with health, again, they put a huge amount of effort to making sure that health colleagues have got the relevant information for GP registrations quite soon, which is very helpful. And then along with the colleagues in the Northeast, we get monthly occupancy data from MEAs, which is broken down by site. We then do a little bit of a data churn internally to break that down via local authority and sub-region and just sort of monitor trends and just keep an eye on occupancy within a local authority area, and then how that impacts on dispersed accommodation as well and the general asylum seeker population. So we use that for our own internal communications. We also have monthly regional asylum engagement meetings with all of our LA leads. And during those meetings, a Home Office will give a data update on contingency sites. So the national picture, number of sites, occupancy, break that down by region, and they do include average length of stay, which is very helpful as well for local authorities when they're looking at service planning. So we've got just a few current issues I wanted to touch on at the moment. These are conversations that have taken place in the last couple of weeks in our contingency meetings. Particularly of relevance, I think, is the impact on local services. So the Home Office have been very clear that although there is a plan to reduce the number of contingency sites in use this year, they are still looking for new sites. I think they want to prepare for the projected numbers that are coming over the summer. Now, those new sites are obviously going to add to the impact on local services, and we are particularly talking to health colleagues and education colleagues. So in some of our local authorities, there are no primary school places available at all for anybody, which is a real worry. The voluntary sector, again, is very, very under pressure, particularly because of the impact of the streamlined asylum process, which I'll touch on in just a second. As a side note, my role at Migration Yorkshire includes supporting the voluntary sector across the region. So I do hear quite harrowing stories about how overreached their services are. So we are very, very conscious of the impact it has on them, and particularly for our new dispersal areas that don't have a robust, trained, equipped, experienced voluntary sector. What we're finding is that people in the contingency sites in those areas are finding their way into the larger cities to access services there. So for example, if I just take Hull as an example, it's geographically surrounded by new dispersal areas that have contingency sites. The people in those sites are finding their way into Hull and then leaning on the voluntary sector in Hull, which of course is causing a real drain on resources, and they're spread quite thinly. So we've just got an eye on that. The streamlined asylum process obviously has come up in conversation, as you would imagine. I think some of the impacts that people are wanting to understand, the movement of people through contingency. So as somebody gets a decision, obviously it vacates a bed space, so somebody will move from a contingency site into dispersed accommodation, creating a bed space in contingency for somebody to move in. So that throughput of people is going to increase the volume of work that's needed for frontline services. Capacity on post-decision services, as well as a conversation that's ongoing, and something which I'm not entirely sure it's confession time. I'm not entirely sure I realised the impact of this until recently, but given that certain nationalities at the moment are being sent the questionnaires under the streamlined asylum process, there is the potential for some on-site community tensions here, given that people are going to be given a decision based on their nationality and not length of stay. So particularly if we will see decisions served in contingency sites, there is that concern that there will be some tensions within those sites. So we are starting to talk to MEAs, voluntary sector local authorities, about how that might be mitigated and managed. Other concerns we have, far right attention, obviously, you know, that comes up. I think it's public knowledge. There was a demonstration in Rotherham recently and Hull this weekend just gone. So that is a topic of conversation that takes place quite regularly. And then again, as we're seeing more movement of people through the contingency sites and potentially new sites arriving on our landscape, there is an increased potential for age dispute cases within those sites. So then that causes pressure on children's services, which plays into the NTS conversation. So we do try to keep an eye on what's going on there. So it gives you a little bit of a flavour of some of the conversations that are happening in the meetings at the moment. I've just shared my contact details. So that's me. Just a side note, my email address is going to change in the next couple of months, but it will default. So please do just email this one and it will default to my new one. I've also given you Adam's contact details. He's my manager at Migration Yorkshire. So he oversees the Refugee Integration Service and all of the asylum work. So if you can never get hold of me, then do by all means go to Adam and he will very happily help you in my absence. That's everything I wanted to cover. So I'm going to stop sharing and open up for questions and comments if anybody has any.
I think what we might do, Vicky, if it's all right, just mindful of time, is if anyone's got anything, they can put it in the chat and either be answered via the chat or we can discuss it in breakout rooms as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really useful, super interesting, and I'm sure like lots of colleagues on the call are certainly you know, really mindful of what you were talking about when you're mentioning current issues and concerns, and what's happening in Yorkshire seems to be mirrored across the national picture and certainly here in Newcastle. So thank you, really useful. Okay, next on the agenda, we're going to hear from Natalie Kadim and Matt Berry from Newham, and they're going to talk a little bit about the work that they're involved in Newham and Newham's approach. So over to you two. Thanks.
Thanks, Rosie. Hi, everyone. I'm Natalie Card. My colleague Matt is on the call. Feel free to introduce yourself, Matt.
Yeah, hi, everyone. I'm Matt Berry. I work for Newham Public Health.
And so I'm going to give you a bit of a presentation today about Newham's response, but focusing more so on our in-reach model that we have launched since June last year. So I'm going to try and share screen and I'll just talk a little bit more to the slides. And then if we've got time, Matt, you can always come in, feel free. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah, fabulous. Yeah. Amazing. Right. So I'm just going to see if I can move that. Okay, so we are the Family Navigators. And we only launched in June last year as well. So we were new to the organisation, we were new to this work as well. So essentially, just to give you a bit of an overview, our Family Navigators are a team of, well, they were a team of 4, they're now a team of 6 going on 8. And their role is to support families who are new to the borough, get that immediate health and social support. So whether that's accessing GP, accessing school, accessing health visiting team, whatever that is, when a family is new to the borough, whether that's they're placed there because they've been homeless by another borough, or they're an asylum seeker staying in contingency accommodation. So where we were almost a year ago. So this is a bit of an overview. I do have a few slides and I'm mindful of time. The main aims of our offer is to help families navigate, connect and support them. So what that means is it's not so much a case holding type of work. It's the model itself is supposed to be to give families that immediate practical support there and then, and to also build a good trusting relationship as well with families and out in the community, very outreach. Now what we did, so this is just a couple of pictures of our lovely navigators. So yeah, this just outlines, you'll get the slides so you'll be able to look at this in more detail. We also do translation for a lot of our navigators speak a second language, which is helpful, but we also do have access to language services, which really does help in this work. But this, what I'm talking to you now, is our universal offer. So the universal offer would be delivered in libraries, it would be delivered in VCFS organisations, you know, out in the community, a food bank, would be linking in with colleagues across the community. But in July 2022, it came to our attention as a service, very new service, that 2 contingency hotels had been stood up in Newham. They'd actually been there for quite some time. One was catered and one was self-catered. So we had 2 hotels. We'd never been into this type of setting before, but we were tasked with going in and providing, again, that role of new to the borough, new to the country. Here's how you access GP, here's how you do this, but it's much more of the in-reach rather than the signposting. So earlier when I talked about the signposting and connecting, this was more of an intensive sort of support, hand-holding, and really being an advocate for families in this population. So when we went in, no one from the local authority had been in, unless, say, a family had been flagged to services and support workers had been in, or, you know, social workers and that, other than VCFS organisations. So Care for Calais were doing amazing work. They were quite stretched, as you can imagine. So when we came in, we really modelled the beauty of us being a new team was that we could model our approach and model on theirs, and it really was that in-reach, that support, practical support. What are the needs, and how can we support the family with their needs, rather than looking at it from a little bit more of a local authority type thing of here is the structure and how do we tailor that. It was very much needs-based, place-based, and we were very much open to that guided mentorship as well by Care for Calais. So we were initially signing families up to GPs, school applications, linking them into pregnancy and maternity support, specifically vulnerable women's team in Newham, who are a vulnerable women's team supporting vulnerable women in Newham with their pregnancy journey. And also supporting families to access food and money due to their destitution. So the key needs that we did assess straight away was access to food, whether it was catered or non-catered accommodation, education, safeguarding concerns, and financial support as well. So again, I won't read all of these because I'm conscious of time, but here are some of the observations, the gaps that we observed. But the impact, I think, is really important to keep in mind when we talk about these challenges. So I'll pick a few. At first, there was reluctance from hotel managers, staff, and I think the structure itself in different pockets was quite reluctant to us being there. But what this meant was that families that had been in there for quite some time didn't know they could access certain things, their rights and entitlements. They weren't informed of support services because they were very much tied to the hotel due to many reasons, as you'll have come across, whether it's being there for food, not having their Aspen cards arriving, so they can't travel, they can't leave, so they have to stay. And then, of course, that leads to the bigger social impact of social isolation. Slow and delayed and sometimes incorrect documentation being sent to families. So whether that's Section 98, Section 95's, Aspen cards, sent to the wrong hotel, you know, back and forth. What that means is that families are left without any money at all. So they are at risk of exploitation, they're at risk of social isolation, and they're not able to access the support and activities that they are entitled to, that they need, and that can help them feel better as well. So yeah, the other things, the communication between the Home Office and the families, a big one, a really, really big one, is the local authority safeguarding teams not being notified of safeguarding incidents at the hotels. So as you're probably aware, the hotels have their own, Home Office has their own safeguarding escalation process. It's very guarded. It's their safeguarding process. They reassure us that they follow this, and that's fine. The problem is that we're not notifying. We're not getting notified of these safeguarding concerns. So therefore, we as a local authority who have a duty of care, we cannot enact that. So what I'll come back to that in a little bit about what we've done so far. But these are the gaps. Another big one, I know I said I wouldn't read them all. Another big one is the power imbalance and the structure of the hotel. So this could be things like going into the hotel for your food and signing in by giving your room number. Very institutionalized, very sort of, yeah, very institutionalized. That was a big thing that we observed. So what we did as navigators in our role and remit, we welcomed families and we made every conversation count. Whether in English or not, we found a way, whether it was Google Translate, whether it was one of our own translators, or if it was a language line, we made sure that families received the same support that they would if they turned up at a library and we were there doing the drop-in. The in-reach model, which I'll come to in a second, is so important for this cohort, because like I said before, with all of the different gaps you'll be aware of, whether it's Aspen cards not coming, whether it's not being able to get to a school, sorting out school uniform, all of these things will mean that the family becomes disconnected from the community that they've been placed, and this does nothing in terms of social isolation, well-being and mental health, and safeguarding as well. So we applied a trauma-informed whole family approach. This meant that obviously we work with, in early help, we work with pregnant women all the way up to 25 for special educational and additional needs, and 18 if there's no additional needs. So we have a broad range. So if a family comes and they've got family of 5, they've got under 5s, yes, we can support, we can help. If they've got a 17-year-old, yes, we can support and help, etc. So we also collaborated really strongly with Care for Calais, loads of other voluntary organisations in Newham that are supporting asylum seekers, the renewal programme. We helped to connect families to those organisations as well. And we've also advocated for families in many ways. So that's whether we've been speaking with Migrant Help regarding Aspen cards, reporting hotel conditions or conduct issues, safeguarding concerns and things, and also advocating for them to access the service provisions that they are eligible for, and that sometimes we just need to give that little bit of a push in the community for services, or whether it's council, internal or external.
Natalie, sorry to interrupt. I'm just mindful of time. Just a couple of minutes to finish off.
Sure, I will wrap up now.
Right. Thank you.
No problem. And you'll get the slides too. So this is what the in-reach looks like, which I've already kind of spoke about. It's that physical presence going into the hotel is so important. It's great to have outreach and to promote outreach initiatives with families at the hotel, but going in and holding hands and advocating for families who otherwise may not have a voice, based on the gaps and the challenges that we spoke about, the power imbalance in the hotels, the lack of communication from home office, the incorrect documentation, all of those things is why in-reach is so important. And you'll get the slides, so I won't go through this now. I'll move on to the last one. But what we've managed to do is we have managed to increase trust between families and our services. I think it's always scary for families in any cohort, any population to contact local authority, to be in contact. There's lots of, things about social services, this and that, worries, which is so understandable. Families have been through a lot as well. So we really take that trauma-informed approach to make sure that we do have that trust and we have that transparency, and we work together with families for the best outcome for them, not doing things to them. So yeah, I will send you the slides. There are other things that if you would like further info on what else we've done, including the robust pathways to support that we've put in place, effective collaboration between external and internal partners, feel free to email me and I'll send you my email in the chat. But thank you for your time. I'm sorry I went over.
No, not at all. That's super interesting. Thank you, Natalie. And yeah, really good to hear a little bit more about Newham's approach. And I know there's a few questions for you in the chat, so I'll let you answer those as well. Thank you very much.
Can I just really quickly mention something that I came across in Newham that is worth noting is the nutrition assessments that you do. And again, just if you wanted more information, hopefully Natalie will have her put her details, but I found those particularly interesting because food is such a major issue. So I just wanted to know that. Thanks.
Yeah, I've
Brilliant.
got just to add. Yeah, we developed a resource for hotel staff and managers. It's around kind of, yeah, I can share that. I'll share that with Maggie, and hope she'll be able to circulate that around food. So that's
Brilliant. That would be really useful, and yeah, definitely something I think that's pertinent again nationally in all of the sites. Brill, if you could share that. Fab. Okay, next we're going to hear a little bit about schools and education. We're going to hear from Megan Greenwood, who leads on the Schools of Sanctuary work for City of Sanctuary, and Mary Rose Puttick, who's an academic who's going to tell us a little bit more about the research that she's been involved in. So over to you two. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rosie. Can everyone see my slide okay?
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Hi everybody. Oh, sorry, just getting a warning sign flashing up, which is very good sign. Oh, I'm frozen again.
Seems to be all right on our end.
Is it? So sorry, it's I'm getting lots of warning signs, which
Not sure what happened to your slides, Megan. Your slides have gone.
give me one more second and I will show again. Are we good?
Yep, got them.
Let's hope so. Yeah, so as Rosie said, my name is Megan. I'm the Schools of Sanctuary Coordinator at City of Sanctuary UK. And Maggie, our local authorities lead, asked me to come along today to share a little bit about what I've been hearing in terms of some common challenges with regards to education for children in hotels, and also some of the models that we've been seeing local authorities adopt to kind of respond to these challenges. I want to preface this by saying I am by no means an expert in the roles and responsibilities of local authorities with regards to education and specifically schools admissions. However, I do think I'm in quite a unique position to be able to kind of see what's going on in lots of different parts of the UK through our local lead network, which is in over 50 local authorities in the UK, in addition to other partnerships with local authorities. So that's just a brief background. But to get started, I just wanted to give a quick overview of some common challenges we've been seeing. So certainly when hotels started to be used quite widely, specifically in like 2021, 2022, I think there was this really common understanding that the use of hotels would be a temporary thing, and that children and families would be moved on after a couple of weeks, but by most 6 weeks. Obviously, we all know that that is sadly not the case. And so while perhaps initially there was this sense that there was no need to kind of try and get children into schools really, really quickly, I think today where we're at is very much a sense that, you know, really we should be trying to help children get into schools because we don't know how long they will be staying in the area. And so in terms of certainly children's kind of like academic needs, but more importantly, their social and emotional needs, and indeed that of their families, it's really important that actually we start looking for school places as soon as we can. Having said that, I'm very conscious that for many local authorities, there is this real issue with not being notified when a hotel is opened, and certainly once which hotels have children in them. And even then, there's often poor communication with regards to the ages of the children and the needs of the children. And so that obviously really slows things down. I think on top of that, there's been for a while lots of lack of clarity with regards to who should be leading on supporting families and get children into school and support them with those admissions processes. There have been some idea that, you know, it's the responsibility of the hotel accommodation staff, whilst in other areas it's very much been local authorities who've taken control of that and led on that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I think that lack of clarity about who's doing what obviously kind of impedes helping people get into hotels helping people get into schools as quickly as possible. Another challenge, as we've mentioned already, is the availability of school places and also the suitability of school places. So in many cases, hotels tend to be in quite isolated, often industrial areas with poor transport links, which makes it very, very difficult for getting children into school, getting them to school. But also there's been the issue of, you know, hotels being in areas where all the local schools or the nearest schools are oversubscribed, an issue of school places in that sense as well. Another issue has been that in new asylum dispersal areas, there have been real challenges managing the paperwork to ensure that children who are eligible, the children who are eligible for free school meals, which are the children in hotels, are you know, that paperwork is being processed quickly, and that's slowing everything down. Another issue is, of course, the lack of funding, whereas children with other kind of refugee statuses, other arrivals in the UK, bring with them some funding that can support the local authority and schools to build up provision and support for them. That is not the case with children in hotels typically. Certainly this has been a particular challenge when it comes to, you know, transportation when hotels are located far away, and also in terms of getting uniform as well. And then finally, I think having finally got children into education, into schools, with so many people within local authorities and schools doing all they can to support these new families and the children, it's been really, really frustrating for everyone involved, including the children and the families themselves, of course, when they've suddenly been uprooted and been forced to move on to a different part of the UK. Often with schools receiving no warning, no notice, and simply only realising this once the children have moved on and not been attending school. So I know that this can seem really disheartening, but hopefully it gives a sense that you are not alone if these are challenges that you're experiencing in your own area. These are things that we are seeing widely across the UK. And I just want to touch on a few different ways we've been hearing about from local authorities and how they've been responding to it. So as Vicky mentioned at the start, you know, certainly in Yorkshire, there's this really clear process. And I think that so many of our local authorities have also been adopting something similar with regards to education. Even if it's not been like consciously or deliberately, having that idea of who's doing what and when has been super helpful. So first and foremost, I think wherever possible, having someone leading on this within a local authority has been, you know, so helpful. Making sure that as soon as they are notified, like Natalie said, getting them into hotels to make sure that they can properly identify just how many children, what their ages are and what their needs are. They are then responsible for communicating that information with schools and providing ongoing communication with the families. And then also, because there is that personal relationship, making sure that the families have ongoing support as they actually get into school and beyond. Now, obviously, a key challenge of this is making sure that this person is notified when a hotel has arrived in the area. I think that there are two ways that we've seen people go about this. One is in areas where they have really, really constructive and positive relationships with the hotel accommodation provider, meaning that that information is conveyed quite quickly, but also that, you know, once that information is conveyed, everyone knows who is leading on school admissions, and that is practice to get them into school as soon as possible is really important. In other areas, because it seems that health teams seem to be going into hotels first and foremost, making sure that the health team knows that they should also be keeping an eye out for how many children are in that hotel, and making sure that the admissions team are aware of that and who they should be contacting about that has also been a really effective way of going about that. Another model that we've seen is kind of some quasi-fair access panels being set up. This is particularly when a hotel arrives with quite large numbers of children. And so rather than going through the process of individual families applying to relevant schools, bringing everyone together to kind of navigate this and make sure that children are being allocated to the most appropriate schools to them and to their needs. I think importantly, these panels seem to be having consultation, certainly with the schools, so the schools feel that they have a voice and have an opportunity to engage in these discussions, but also with local refugee support charities, because I think otherwise they feel sometimes a little bit locked out, and they don't understand why some decisions are being made, why a child is being assigned to a school really far away, for instance, not knowing that there are no places, or why some decisions are being made. So I think kind of having those open forums to discuss this and make sure that everyone's voices are heard are really important. Equally, by bringing everyone into this room, it has been offering really meaningful opportunities to fill different gaps. So for instance, some local charities have realised that, you know, there are no schools with places locally, and that the local authority is really struggling with covering the costs of transportation. So the local charity has been able to organise the donation of scooters and bikes to help children actually get to school. Equally, they've also been able to step up and support with acquiring uniform and things like that. And so it's kind of just bringing everyone into the same room and helping kind of navigate these challenges together. Another really common issue we've seen like I mentioned, is that in the new asylum dispersal areas, trying to manage the paperwork to confirm children's eligibility for things like free school meals and holiday activity and food programs has been really quite slow when they're not used to processing all this paperwork. So we've seen that rather than these entitlements having to come through revenue and benefits, putting it in the hands of the school admissions team, especially when they're already working closely with the families in the hotel on this, has helped speed this whole process up. And they've managed to, process all of the families in the hotel's paperwork at once. I know a big challenge has been that families have often not had the documentation they've needed to prove their eligibility, and that has been a slow process. So instead, the school admissions team, through that strong, positive, constructive relationship with the hotel, has been able to actually get that documentation directly from the hotel accommodation provider, and then they were able to tick that box for the local authorities audit tool and make sure the family can access that, or the child can access that free school meals. And finally, I'll mention really quickly, and then I'll pass on to Mary Rose. We've seen quite a few local authorities starting to adopt some kind of transitional education provision, or what my colleague Maggie refers to as meanwhile education provision, to kind of bridge that gap between a child arriving in a hotel and the necessary time it takes to get them into school. This education provision is often on site and tends to act as a focus on really bridging that gap. So, basic English acquisition, but also more importantly, perhaps learning what the UK education system is about for both the child and the families, common school rules, common school routines and things like that. So really, as soon as a child enters school, they can hit the ground running and really feel like they understand what's going on. But importantly, I would always stress that this transitional education provision should be time limited, with a focus on getting children into mainstream schools as soon as possible. But with that, I will pass over to Mary Rose. I'll just say that obviously I've been drawing on things I've been hearing from across the UK. If any of this sounds of interest to you, do send me an email. I'll pop it in the chat, my email in the chat, and I can try and connect you with our leads in relevant areas who can inform you more on the specifics of what they're doing if any of this is of interest.
Thanks, Megan. So hi everyone, my name is Mary Rose and I'm from the University of Wolverhampton. I'll just be very quick just to give a few examples that go into a bit more detail about some of the things that Megan was talking about. So this is a British Council funded project, Waiting for School, and I've worked across the West Midlands region with schools of sanctuary, the councils and refugee third sector organisations. So I just wanted to highlight a few kind of standout examples. Because at the end of the project, I'm trying to develop knowledge and partnerships between the third sector and schools to kind of connect up and fill some of those gaps in the children's transition to school. And also to produce a resource at the end of it that will be shared across schools and the refugee sector. Steps in Samwell is a transitory education provision, which is a very kind of unique provision provided by Sandwell City Council. And it actually provides education to children while they're waiting for a school place in a school-like setting. So it's very, quite an unusual provision. Children get 17 hours of classes per week, and in the afternoons they have children with special educational needs, because the children with special educational needs and disabilities tend to be waiting a lot longer for school places. So in their work at STEPS, they provide a very holistic approach. They provide food bank vouchers, transport provision, and they work closely with an educational psychologist. So they are a kind of bridging service for the families living in hotels. Some of the issues that they raised were around when they do home visits, the conditions that some of the families are living in, some of the young people working illegally, and some of the invisible poverty that families are experiencing that isn't recognised in schools if they've got no recourse to public funds. And then the other example is Birmingham Centre for Arts Therapies, which is it's a voluntary sector organisation which is currently funded by lottery funding, and they're going into hotels and providing education for children and families while they're waiting for a school place. So some of the issues that link to some of the other talks are, they said support for provision varies greatly between the hotels. So a lot of the hotels don't have a communal space, or the security won't kind of share information about what's going on with families. So they think that someone needs to be that link between the charities and the hotels, and to value that work that's going on by the voluntary sector. And also they said there needs to be more knowledge sharing between charities, because, like, for example, in Wolverhampton, they've hardly got any support going into hotels, whereas in Birmingham, they've got a lot more support. So there isn't necessarily an opportunity for knowledge sharing about or coordination of what support is going in. So those are some of the main issues that have come up so far. But yeah, I'll update, hopefully get a chance to update and share the resource at the end of the project. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary Rose. Really interested, and be great to share the resource at the end of the project. And thank you, Megan. I know there's lots of comments in the chat, but certainly lots of that resonated with our experience in Newcastle, and I think has for colleagues on the call nationally as well. Okay, our final speakers before we go into our breakout room, we're going to hear from Phil Clark from Liverpool City Council, and also I think Misbah from Hope Not Hate, who are going to talk to us a little bit about community cohesion and combating hate. So over to you, Phil and Misbah.
Sorry, I just have to clarify, Misbah has really bad Wi-Fi at the moment, so she won't be able to join, but I'm Sophia, I'm a researcher at Hope Not Hate, and I'll be covering for her.
Amazing, thank you for stepping in, Sophia. Okay, over to you guys. Thanks.
Cool, thanks. Sophia, do you want to go first, give the kind of more national side of things, and I'll give local?
Absolutely, sure. So bear with me. I will try and cover what Misbah wanted to cover, but we work together, so we should be saying the same things approximately. We're not on two completely different lines. So so the national context first when it comes to anti-migrant hate. We, as some of you may already know, we've been tracking anti-migrant hate over the last few years, and specifically in our latest State of Hate report, we've talked about how anti-migrant visits to hotel accommodation has really gone up 102% in 2022 compared to 2021. And this is mostly due to a small but very active group of anti-migrant activists. So the intensity has gone up, but also more people have joined this type of action, partly, I think, because of true believers, but also because it works in terms of views, because all this is uploaded online and on far-right kind of groups, and this is the thing that gives them the most views. So in terms of the anti-migrant context and the far right, what we've seen in 2023, so again, kind of moving forward, anti-migrant protests have always kind of existed, but in the last year, when we were monitoring them, we could say there was an anti-migrant protest in June, and everyone knew what we were talking about. And as we've seen recently, that's not the case anymore. We're tracking anywhere between 3 and 6, 7 per week, and the far right groups have identified this as a weak point and a place where they've used several tactics to kind of insert themselves into either the rhetoric or just the story, into local concerns. So latching onto local concerns about little information being given by the Home Office, or weddings being cancelled at hotels because hotel accommodation is now, closed for migrants. And what's worrying is the part where identified a local protest, something that's done by the locals for the locals type of thing, worried about migration, and then hearing slogans and narratives which are very much far right and which weren't there previously but now has become an important part of the story. And it's enough to have a rumor of sexual harassment of a person, even if those have been proved untrue, to really it's really that spark that can lead to a large number of people. And then you have groups like Patriotic Alternative, which is a relatively small but very active group that has a very extreme leadership, that can then portray themselves as we are the protectors of the locals, of the local populace, when actually they're really trying to pass their more extreme messages on. So policy, which is MISPA's area, some of the things we've been pushing for strongly at national level, and within conversation with government officials, etc., is an end to the language being used by the government, the inflammatory language being used, and how some of this language being used by the media legitimizes the far right rhetoric. And I mean, there's a reason we send off briefings in certain areas on what far right groups are attending and who they really are, because the way they're covered can be absolutely awful. Sorry, the way they're covered is absolutely great for them, because they're just portrayed as a local concerned group instead of what they're actually doing in those areas. So, I've seen PA members, spokespeople, just being a local concerned resident, which is, as you can imagine, really bad. And then the prioritization of safeguarding around unsafe accommodation, including a reinstatement of DHLUC's tension monitoring unit to centrally track, record, and share intelligence. So basically, better information gathering. Where obviously everyone is very, there's a lot to cover, but definitely would help to have more either collaboration or just better monitoring from the government side or unit who does this. And then long-term plan for suitable community-based accommodation for people seeking asylum, which includes addressing the backlog that traps people in unsuitable accommodation. Because at the end of the day, I've been talking about the far right for a while, but there are concerns at local level, and we can't just say this is the far right, this is the far right. There's these protests are happening, and they're often local led. They might be helped by the far right, they might be made more extreme by the far right. The far right may give them talking points, they may share really incendiary stories and have like a local group of extreme, but at the end this is a local story too. And I hope I've mentioned everything Misbah wanted to. Phil, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, brilliant. So I suppose from a Liverpool point of view, I mean, unfortunately, we've, suffered a lot of the things in terms of the way the far right have exploited local concerns. Obviously, Liverpool, we are Liverpool City region, so we have, Knowsley, Wirral, Sefton, Halton, and hopefully I haven't got anyone. So in terms of kind of, we collectively try and work together to kind of push back on a lot of these issues, and big part of it is about being. I've missed St. Helens, sorry, and don't want to forget St. Helens. It's about collectively working together to push back on issues. So for example, we'll have we have monthly meetings, and try and share intelligence. Make sure that we have a kind of regular, communications that are, similar, combined. We're all kind of singing from the same page. In terms of kind of local issues, I suppose, in Liverpool, we will try our best to make sure we're as present as possible in terms of in the hotel, supporting the residents in the hotel, but also kind of sort of getting involved as soon as there are local issues to make sure that kind of vacuums aren't created and that turn into protests or turn into issues. So for example, you know, city centre hotels where there's local residents and you know, people within the hotel are being blamed for issues that, you know, are not them. Ultimately it's part of it's rumour mixed with nighttime economy issues. So but you know, for us it's about going and speaking to the residents in those areas, our licensing team speaking to the businesses and really pushing back on the rumour, but also, you know, saying, listen, if there are legitimate concerns around crime, you need to make sure that you report them. For example, we have an on-street harassment campaign. Make sure that, you know, those posters are up there. So if people, you know, if people do suffer that harassment, whoever it's from, then report it. You know, a lot of the things that were being called out for against our hotels were not being reported, and most of the time because ultimately they were rumour. And I think it's very much about saying that if there are issues, report them. We are, you know, we're the council, we're here to report you. This is how you report ASB. We were also quite present in terms of police coming down and speaking to local residents and kind of reassuring people, but also going into the hotel and making sure that people, so the community team, for example, police community team and ourselves went into the hotel, spoke about hate crime and how to get support if you suffer it, and also making sure that it is reported, even if it's just, you know, it's reported to the hotel first, to make sure that those kind of things whereby hate crime is beginning to ramp up doesn't become something bigger, because, you know, that kind of red flag stuff. I suppose another thing we've tried to do is grab hold of the narrative. You know, big issue that we had is the control of the narrative that the far right did, that went into communities, such as some of the stuff that Hope Not Hate have kind of shared. So we've put in response to the Knowsley incidents, we've put money into you know, a quick fire a small grants fund to fund some grants projects which are doing, you know, some narrative stuff around social media and around shared meals together and myth busting, all that kind of stuff, where we can just kind of respond quickly to grab hold of the narrative and try and get those messages in places where they're heard. So for example, you know, local community organizations passing those messages on, as opposed to you know, it being something that maybe people are less likely to listen to. So that kind of is part of it, and also as well as about linking that into our hopefully our bigger longer term grants program, you know, having that as an ongoing thing, and as well you know, just making sure that we are present, we're available, and linking into other things that are happening in the city. I have to obligatory mention of Eurovision, but making sure that those kind of celebratory narratives of Eurovision are linked into the kind of wider sanctuary narrative, to make sure that some of the social media quote unquote press that's happening doesn't kind of grab hold quick enough to end up with people out on the streets protesting. So that's a kind of whistle top tour of Liverpool. I could probably give you another 20 minutes, but I won't. It's over to you, Rosie. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Phil. Super interested in all the things around the narrative and the grants project. I'd be really interested to hear more about. So if you've got any information to share in the chat, that would be great. And thank you, Safia, also super interesting. And again, just lots to think about there. And again, I could see people nodded and lots of things that have come in through the chat. Certainly from my perspective of listening to all of the speakers today, just super interested in how much it resonates and how similar, obviously, every place is different, every hotel or contingency site is different, but lots of similarities of the issues that are challenging for local authorities and also for the residents in the hotel as well. Okay, so we've got about 20 minutes or so in breakout rooms. As I mentioned at the beginning, these breakout rooms won't be being recorded, so feel free to share freely amongst colleagues. And yeah, we'll get into some of the discussions in the room and see you back in 20 minutes or so. Thanks, everyone. Okay, I think that's everyone back now. Okay, I realise we're 1 minute over, and I know everybody always likes to finish on time, and we've been at lunch and everything. I just wanted to say thank you to all of the speakers today. Really interesting to get insights from across the different areas about different approaches and how people have been responding to this. And as always, really good to hear other good examples from other local authorities. That's part of the reason why the City of Sanctuary Local Authority Network exists, and it's been really useful to hear all of that today. Thank you to Maggie and the City of Sanctuary team for setting everything up and coordinating, and thank you all for your time. Hope to see you again. We'll make sure that the slides are shared and links are shared and that the recording's shared as well. So yeah, thanks very much everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.